What would you do if the one person you thought was gone forever suddenly reappeared, bringing with them a chance to rewrite the past? In this heartwarming and unexpected tale, a weary mall Santa finds himself face to face with a ghost from his past, through the innocent eyes of a little girl. As memories of lost love and regret come rushing back, secrets are revealed, and lives are forever changed. Will he find the courage to seek forgiveness and rebuild what was broken? Stay tuned to uncover the twists, the tears, and the ultimate journey of redemption in this unforgettable Christmas story. But before diving, let me know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because we'll be bringing you more amazing gift tomorrow. Now, let's start this journey together. The harsh glow of the mall's fluorescent lights barely cut through the haze of exhaustion settling over Elliot Carter. It was the fourth day in a row that he donned the fraying red Santa suit, the fake beard itching against his jawline. From the employee lounge, he could hear the hum of holiday shoppers and the distant chime of Christmas carols, their cheer contrasting starkly with the weight he carried in his heart. At 46, Elliot wasn't the man he'd once imagined he would be. The mirror on the inside of his locker reflected back a face lined with regret, gray streaks peppering his once dark hair. His eyes, dulled by years of disappointment, stared back as he adjusted the padded suit. A muffled "ho ho ho" escaped his lips in a half-hearted attempt to practice the jovial voice required of him. But the sound felt hollow, just like the life he now led. This wasn't what he had planned, not when he was young and full of dreams. Back then, he had Camille, bright, hopeful Camille, who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. She had seen a future in him, one he'd walked away from out of fear of failure. Elliot closed the locker door with a heavy sigh and trudged toward the mall center. The sprawling Christmas display was a spectacle of excess, complete with oversized ornaments and a towering tree strung with enough lights to rival the stars. Parents waited with restless children in a snaking line that stretched past the food court, eager to get a picture with Santa. Settling into the plush red throne that served as a Santa chair, Elliot forced a smile, his cheeks already aching from the charade. One by one, children climbed onto his lap, each armed with a wish list: a bike, a puppy, the newest video game console. Elliot nodded and chuckled in all the right places, offering words of encouragement to their bright faces, even as his heart remained tethered to a past he couldn't undo. Hours passed in a blur of camera flashes and forced laughter. The line dwindled, and Elliot's energy flagged. Just as he began to mentally count down the minutes to his next break, a small voice caught his attention. "Hi, Santa." He looked up to see a young girl, no older than 6, standing shyly in front of him. She wore a powder blue coat, and her dark braids were tied with red ribbons that matched the bows on the Christmas tree behind her. Unlike the other children, who fidgeted with excitement, this girl stood calmly, her intelligent eyes fixed on him. "What's your name, little one?" Elliot asked, summoning his best Santa voice. "Lily," she replied with a quiet confidence that seemed unusual for her age. "Well, Lily, what would you like for Christmas?" Lily hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her coat. "I brought you something," she said, pulling out a photograph. The edges were soft and worn, as though it had been held many times before. Curious, Elliot took the picture from her small hands. The moment his eyes landed on it, his breath caught in his chest. The woman in the photo was unmistakable. Camille. Her smile was just as he remembered, warm, radiant, the kind of smile that made the world seem lighter. The sight of her dark hair, caught mid-laugh, and her familiar eyes sent a jolt through him. "That's my mommy," Lily said matter-of-factly, pointing at the picture. "Her name is Camille." Elliot's hands trembled slightly as he held the photograph, his mind spinning. This little girl, this bright, curious child, was Camille's daughter? "She works a lot," Lily continued, her small voice breaking through his haze. "She's a nurse, and she doesn't smile as much anymore. I think it's because my daddy went to heaven." Her words hit Elliot like a punch to the gut. Camille had a family she'd built after he'd left her. And now she was raising this remarkable child on her own. "I don't want any toys for Christmas," Lily said earnestly, her big eyes searching his face. I just want my mommy to be happy again. Can you do that, Santa? For the first time in years, Elliot felt his carefully constructed mask slipping. He tried to respond, but his throat was tight with emotion. He swallowed hard and managed a strained. Your mommy sounds like a very special person. She is, Lily nodded. She's the best mommy in the world. Lily climbed down from his lap, straightening her coat with the same deliberate care she'd shown when presenting the photograph. Thank you for listening, Santa, she said with a small wave before disappearing into the crowd. Elliot sat frozen in his chair, the photograph still clutched in his hand. The laughter of children, the chime of holiday music, the bustle of shoppers. It all faded into the background as he stared at Camille's familiar face. How had their lives intersected like this? And why now? A knot of guilt and longing tightened in his chest. He thought of the life he could have had, the life he'd thrown away when he walked out on Camille, convinced she deserved someone better. But now, seeing her daughter's earnest hope, he realized how deeply his absence might have shaped her world. As his break time approached, Elliot stumbled off the Santa throne, mumbling an excuse to the mall's head elf, who looked at him with concern. He found a quiet corner near the loading dock and leaned against the cold concrete wall. The photograph trembled in his grasp. He had always told himself that leaving Camille was for the best, that she was better off without him. But now, holding this photo and hearing Lily's wish, the lies he'd told himself crumbled. For the first time in years, Elliot felt something stir inside him, something that had been buried beneath layers of regret and self-doubt. It wasn't just guilt. It was a glimmer of hope. Perhaps fate was offering him a chance to make things right. As he looked at the photograph one last time, Camille's eyes seemed to hold both an invitation and a challenge. He didn't know where to start, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let this moment slip away. With trembling hands, Elliot tucked the photo into the pocket of his Santa suit. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a second chance, a chance to face the ghost of his past and perhaps find redemption. And he wasn't going to let it pass him by. The ride home that evening felt like a blur for Elliot Carter. The photograph of Camille, now tucked safely into his jacket pocket, burned against his chest as if it carried the weight of all his regrets. His small apartment, nestled above a diner on the outskirts of town, was dim and quiet when he entered. The faint hum of traffic outside was the only sound as he hung his jacket on a chair and pulled the photo from its pocket. He sat at the worn kitchen table, staring at the image of the woman he had once loved. The memory of her smile, the warmth of her laugh, came rushing back like a tide he'd tried to hold back for years. Camille had been everything he wasn't: hopeful, resilient, and endlessly forgiving. She had believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. Elliot reached for the small box in the corner of his cupboard. Inside was a collection of items he hadn't dared to look at in years: a concert ticket from their first date, a keychain she'd given him as a joke, and a dried flower from their first hike together. He held the keychain in his hand, running his thumb over the faded lettering. Be brave. Be brave, he murmured to himself. But he hadn't been brave. He had run. Years ago, when things had started getting serious with Camille, Elliot's insecurities had consumed him. His father had walked out on their family when Elliot was young, and he'd spent years watching his mother struggle. The fear that he'd become like his father had haunted him. Rather than risk failing Camille, he had decided she'd be better off without him. So, one night, he left a short note on her kitchen counter and disappeared. Elliot slammed the lid of the box shut, the guilt clawing at his chest. It had been over a decade, but the hurt he'd caused her clearly lingered. Lily's innocent wish for her mother's happiness only deepened his resolve. He couldn't erase the past, but perhaps he could do something to make Camille's present better. The next morning, Elliot made a decision. He pulled out an old business card from the drawer, a contact from years ago. Clara Ramirez, a private investigator he'd once hired to help track down an old friend. She was no-nonsense and thorough, the kind of person who could find anyone. Dialing her number, Elliot tapped his fingers nervously against the table. The line clicked, and a familiar voice answered. Clara Ramirez speaking. Clara, it's Elliot Carter. I need your help. There was a pause before Clara replied, her tone cautious. Elliot, it's been years. What kind of trouble are you in this time? No trouble, Elliot said quickly, his voice trembling slightly. I need to find someone. Her name is Camille. Camille Harris. We were close a long time ago, and I've realized I need to make amends. Clara sighed on the other end. Making amends, huh? That's a new one for you. Her voice softened, though. All right, give me everything you know about her. Full name, where she might have worked, anything you've got. Elliot provided every detail he could remember. From the nursing school Camille had attended to the old address they'd shared briefly. Clara listened carefully, asking follow-up questions. By the time they hung up, Elliot felt a flicker of hope, though it was tinged with anxiety. 3 days later, Clara called him back. I found her, she said simply. Elliot's heart raced as Clara shared what she'd uncovered. Camille now worked as a nurse at Memorial Hospital, juggling long shifts to support her daughter. Her husband, Ryan Harris, had passed away 3 years earlier after a prolonged battle with a rare illness. The medical bills from his treatment had drained their savings, and despite her tireless work, Camille was still struggling to pay off the debt. She lives in a modest apartment with Lily, Clara continued. Her neighbors say she's kind but keeps to herself. And Elliot, Clara hesitated. What? Elliot pressed, his throat dry. She's tired, overworked. Everything I've found points to a woman who's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She's doing it for her daughter, but she's stretched thin. Elliot closed his eyes, the image of Camille's warm smile now replaced by the thought of her exhaustion. His chest tightened with guilt. He had abandoned her, and now she was left carrying burdens he might have helped her bear. Clara's voice softened. What's your plan, Elliot? Are you just going to show up and say sorry? Because I've got to tell you, that's not going to cut it with someone like her. I don't know yet, Elliot admitted, his voice breaking. I want to help. Even if she doesn't want to see me, I need to find a way to make things a little easier for her. Clara was silent for a moment. All right, I'll send you the details. But tread carefully, Elliot. This isn't just about you. That night, Elliot sat at his kitchen table, staring at the information Clara had sent him. The address, the hospital, the details of Camille's financial struggles. It was all there, laid bare before him. He felt both closer to her and more distant than ever. He thought of Lily, her innocent wish still echoing in his mind. I just want my mommy to be happy again. Elliot picked up a pen and a piece of paper, scribbling down ideas. Anonymous donations to help with the medical debt. Small acts of kindness that might lighten her load without overwhelming her. He couldn't undo the pain he'd caused, but he could at least start to make amends. By the time he finished, the paper was covered in notes and plans. One stood out above the rest. Start by helping her without asking for anything in return. As he prepared for another shift at the mall, Elliot looked at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't just see the weary, aging man he had become. He saw a man determined to make things right. Be brave, he whispered to himself, echoing the words on the keychain Camille had given him all those years ago. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, Elliot felt something stir in his heart. Hope. Elliot Carter adjusted the oversized white beard that clung awkwardly to his chin as he settled into the Santa throne for another long day at the mall. The twinkling Christmas lights above him seemed brighter than ever, the cheer they projected at odds with the weight he carried in his chest. His conversation with the private investigator Clara had only deepened his resolve and his guilt. Camille Harris was struggling, working tirelessly to keep herself and Lily afloat, all while bearing the scars of losing her husband. Every time Elliot thought of her smile from that old photo, he couldn't help but feel the sting of knowing he had once been the cause of her pain. Today, though, he forced himself to focus on the here and now. Children bustled around the mall, their laughter and excitement filling the air as parents herded them into lines for their turn with Santa. As the first child climbed onto his lap, Elliot launched into his rehearsed, ho ho ho, greeting. For hours, the routine carried him through. A new bike here, a stuffed bear there. Elliot listened to their wishes with the practiced warmth of someone who had done this more times than he could count. But his thoughts kept drifting to Camille and the plan forming in the back of his mind. Then, In the late afternoon, the crowd parted, and Elliot's breath caught in his chest. Standing near the edge of the Santa display was Lily. She clutched the hand of a woman in blue scrubs, a tired yet familiar face that Elliot recognized instantly. Camille. She looked older than the image in his mind, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion and her shoulders slightly hunched from the weight of her responsibilities. Yet there she was, unmistakably Camille. The sight of her stirred a mix of emotions: joy at seeing her again, regret for all the years they had lost, and a nervous energy that left his hands trembling. Lily noticed him first. "Santa!" she exclaimed, tugging on Camille's hand. "It's him!" Camille followed her daughter's gaze, her brow furrowing as she looked toward the man in the red suit. Her steps faltered, and for a moment, it seemed as if she might turn away. But Lily was already pulling her forward, weaving through the line of children. Elliot's heart pounded as they approached. He wanted to leap up, to explain himself, to tell Camille everything, but he stayed rooted in his chair, unsure of how to begin. "Hi, Santa," Lily said brightly as she reached him, her voice cutting through the buzz of the crowd. Elliot managed a warm smile, though his throat tightened. "Hello, Lily. It's wonderful to see you again." Camille stood a few feet behind her daughter, her arms crossed tightly. Her gaze lingered on Elliot's face, as if trying to place him. Lily climbed onto his lap with the ease of a child who had done this before. "I've been good, Santa," she declared proudly. "And I've been helping Mommy a lot, too." Elliot nodded, glancing briefly at Camille. "I'm sure your mommy is very proud of you," he said softly, his words carrying a weight that Lily couldn't understand. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "She is, but you know what, Santa? She's still really tired a lot. I told you last time, remember? I just want her to be happy." Camille stiffened at her daughter's words, her expression hardening. She took a step forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Lily, sweetie, let's let Santa take care of the other children now. There's a long line behind us." "But Mom, now." "Lily," Camille said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Lily slid off Elliot's lap reluctantly, but not before giving him a hopeful smile. "Don't forget my wish, Santa." Elliot's voice cracked slightly as he replied, "I won't." As Lily skipped toward the exit of the display, Camille stayed behind for a moment. Her eyes met Elliot's, and in that instant, he saw the flicker of recognition cross her face. Her jaw tightened, and she looked away quickly, her hand gripping the strap of her bag. "Camille," Elliot began, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned to him sharply, her expression a mixture of shock and anger. "You have no right," she said in a low voice, her words cutting like glass. "Stay away from us." Before he could respond, she spun on her heel and hurried after Lily, her footsteps brisk and determined. Elliot remained frozen, the weight of her words sinking into him. The cheerful chatter of children faded into the background as he watched her retreating figure. The chance he had longed for had come, but it had slipped through his fingers before he could even begin to explain. He finished his shift in a daze, his thoughts consumed by the look in Camille's eyes. It wasn't just anger he had seen there. It was hurt, the kind of hurt he knew he had caused years ago. As the mall closed for the evening, Elliot found himself wandering aimlessly through the emptying corridors. His mind raced with questions and doubts. Would Camille ever be willing to hear him out? Was it even fair of him to try to insert himself back into her life after all this time? By the time he reached the employee parking lot, the crisp winter air did little to clear his thoughts. He leaned against his car, pulling the photo of Camille from his pocket. Lily's words echoed in his mind. "I just want her to be happy." Elliot clenched his fists. He couldn't give up. Not now. If Camille wasn't ready to talk, he would find another way to show her that he had changed. Actions, not words, would have to speak for him. For Lily's sake, and for the woman he had never stopped loving. He would prove that he wasn't the same man who had walked away all those years ago. The first step, Elliot realized, was to understand Camille's world. He would learn about the life she had built, the struggles she faced, and the dreams she still held on to. Only then could he begin to make amends. With renewed determination, Elliot climbed into his car. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to walk away this time. Elliot Carter sat in his dimly lit apartment, the glow of the streetlights filtering through the window. The confrontation with Camille replayed in his mind like a broken record. Her sharp words and the pain in her eyes haunted him. He knew he couldn't expect forgiveness right away, if ever, but he wasn't ready to give up. Camille's daughter, Lily, had ignited something in him. Her innocence, her hope. It was a reminder of what he'd lost and what he might still have a chance to regain, even if just in the smallest way. He pulled out the photo of Camille and Lily that Lily had shown him and placed it on the table. Start small, he murmured to himself. The next morning, Elliot returned to the worn piece of paper where he'd jotted down his plans. He had already taken one step by paying off part of Camille's lingering medical debt. It had been a modest sum, enough to cover one of the more pressing bills. He hoped it would at least ease some of the financial pressure weighing her down. But actions speak louder than words, and Elliot knew he needed to do more, without overwhelming Camille or appearing intrusive. Camille Harris was sorting through her mail in the cramped kitchen of her apartment when she spotted an envelope marked with the hospital's logo. Her stomach sank, as it always did when she saw those familiar letters. Setting Lily's bowl of cereal on the table, she opened the envelope with trembling hands. Instead of the hefty balance she expected, she found a note from the billing department. Your most recent account balance has been settled in full. Payment received via anonymous donation. Camille blinked, rereading the words. Her first instinct was disbelief. Had there been a mistake? Who would do this? She folded the letter and stared at it for several moments, her mind racing. Mama, are you okay? Lily asked, her spoon paused midair. Camille forced a smile, brushing her hand against her daughter's cheek. Yes, sweetie. Everything's fine. Eat your breakfast. But her heart wasn't fine. The relief of having one less bill to worry about was quickly replaced by confusion and suspicion. Who would help her in this way? And why? A week later, Camille and Lily returned home from a long day. Camille had worked an extended shift at the hospital, and Lily had spent hours at a neighbor's house. Camille juggled the groceries in one hand while unlocking the door with the other. As they stepped into the apartment, Lily froze. Mama, look, she exclaimed, pointing to the small dining table. Camille's gaze followed her daughter's finger to a neatly wrapped package sitting in the center of the table. It was adorned with a red ribbon and a tag that simply read, "For Lily." How did this get here? Camille murmured, setting the groceries down cautiously. Lily didn't wait for an answer. She tore into the wrapping paper with the giddy excitement only a child could muster. Inside was a beautiful hand-carved wooden jewelry box. The lid was engraved with an intricate design of stars and flowers, and when Lily opened it, a soft melody began to play, a tune she recognized from one of her favorite bedtime songs. It's so pretty, Lily exclaimed, turning the box over in her hands. Camille inspected the gift carefully, her brow furrowed. It was a thoughtful gesture, almost too thoughtful. Her thoughts immediately jumped to Elliot. She hadn't seen him since their encounter at the mall, but something about this gift felt like him. Lily danced around the room with her new treasure. But Camille's mind was elsewhere. If this was Elliot's doing, what was he trying to accomplish? Unbeknownst to Camille, Elliot had spent the past few days carefully planning his next moves. He didn't want to frighten her or push her away further. Instead, he focused on gestures that might speak to the person he remembered Camille to be. Someone who appreciated kindness and effort over grand declarations. He visited the local grocery store one evening, purchasing a gift card and slipping it into an envelope marked, "For a hard-working mother." He had the clerk deliver it to Camille's address, ensuring his name remained absent from the gesture. He also arranged for fresh flowers to be anonymously sent to the pediatric ward at Memorial Hospital, where he knew Camille worked. Each bouquet came with a note that read, "For those who bring light to the lives of others." For Lily, he carved small wooden charms in his free time, miniature stars, hearts, and animals, leaving them in a box at the front desk of her school with a note. To a bright and thoughtful little girl. The gestures didn't go unnoticed. Camille found herself growing more and more wary as the anonymous gifts and acts of kindness continued. She sat across from her friend Naomi Jacobs one afternoon, venting her frustrations. Naomi had been her closest confidant for years, the person Camille turned to during her husband's illness and after his passing. I don't know who's doing this, Camille said, pushing her coffee cup aside. But it's starting to feel unsettling. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Unsettling or thoughtful? Camille shook her head. Both. The debt, the gift for Lily, the flowers, it's too personal. Whoever this is knows me. Knows us. Naomi leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Have you thought it might be him? That guy you ran into at the mall? Camille's stomach twisted. She had told Naomi about Elliot, sparing no detail about the pain he had caused her years ago. I don't want it to be him, she admitted. Because if it is, what does he want from us? Naomi gave her a knowing look. Maybe he just wants to make things right. Several days later, Camille was walking Lily home from school when they passed the community playground. Lily ran ahead, giggling as she spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the swings. Santa, Lily called, out, waving enthusiastically. Camille's heart sank as she recognized Elliot. He wasn't in his Santa suit this time, just a simple jacket and jeans, but there was no mistaking him. Lily, come back here, Camille called, her tone sharp. Lily hesitated, but ultimately obeyed, skipping back to her mother's side. Camille stared at Elliot, her eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? Elliot stood, his hands in his pockets. I was just passing through, he said carefully, his voice steady. I didn't mean to intrude. Camille didn't reply, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. I know you don't trust me, Elliot continued, his tone soft. And I don't blame you. But I'm not trying to interfere in your life. I want to help. Camille folded her arms, keeping Lily close. Help? By sending anonymous gifts and paying off bills? That's not how you fix things, Elliot. He nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. I know, but it's all I can do for now. Camille looked at him for a long moment before turning away. Come on, Lily. Let's go home. As she walked away, Elliot stayed rooted to the spot, watching them disappear down the path. He knew earning Camille's trust would take time and actions that spoke louder than words, and he was willing to do whatever it took. The December morning was crisp and bright as Elliot Carter adjusted his scarf, standing nervously on the sidewalk outside Camille's apartment building. He wasn't sure if this was a step too far, but he couldn't shake the memory of Lily's innocent smile or her simple wish for her mother's happiness. His hesitation ended when the door opened, and a delighted voice called out, Santa! Lily bounded down the steps, her red coat flaring like a superhero's cape. She grabbed his hand without hesitation, her eyes sparkling with joy. You're here! Are you really coming to make cookies with me today? Elliot smiled, crouching to her level. If your mom's okay with it, I'd love to. Camille appeared at the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She had agreed to let him spend time with Lily after some persistent convincing from her friend Naomi, who'd argued that it might be good for both of them. But the guarded look in her eyes made it clear this was on her terms. Lily, stay where I can see you, Camille called, her tone firm. Yes, Mama, Lily chirped, dragging Elliot toward the door. Camille gave Elliot a curt nod before stepping aside. I'll be in the next room, she said. Don't make me regret this. Lily's enthusiasm was infectious as she pulled out bowls, cookie cutters, and sprinkles from the cupboards. The tiny kitchen quickly filled with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon as Elliot helped her measure flour and sugar. Do you like cookies, Santa? Lily asked, her nose dusted with flour. I love them, Elliot said with a grin. But I think you're the real cookie expert here. Lily giggled, carefully rolling out the dough with both hands. Mom says I make the best stars, but she's always too busy to help me make them anymore. Elliot's hands paused midair as he reached for the cookie cutter. Your mom works really hard, doesn't she? Lily nodded, her expression growing thoughtful. She does. She's super strong, but I think she's lonely sometimes. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. The weight of Lily's words settled over Elliot like a heavy blanket. He watched her line up the stars on the baking tray, her small hands moving with focus and care. Do you ever get lonely, Lily? He asked gently. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice soft. But I have my stuffed animals, and Mama always gives me hugs before bed. Elliot knelt beside her, his voice kind but earnest. You know, Lily, you're a pretty special kid. Your mom's lucky to have you. And you're a good Santa, she replied, smiling brightly. After the cookies baked and cooled, Lily insisted they play her favorite board game, a colorful adventure involving castles and dragons. Elliot couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed so much as Lily explained the rules with dramatic flair, making up parts of the game as they went along. No, Santa, you can't cross the rainbow bridge unless you have the magic wand, she declared, holding up a glittery plastic straw as if it were the most powerful artifact in the world. Well, in that case, Elliot said, pretending to ponder, I guess I'd better roll the dice and hope for the best. Camille hovered in the doorway, arms crossed but with a faint smile tugging at her lips. Watching Lily giggle so freely was a sight she hadn't seen in far too long. Elliot caught Camille's gaze and held it for a moment, silently acknowledging her presence. Her expression shifted, and she retreated into the living room. Without a word, as the afternoon turned to evening, Elliot and Lily sat at the small dining table, enjoying their freshly baked cookies with tall glasses of milk. Santa? Lily asked, her tone more serious now. Yes, Lily? Do you think people can have happy endings? Elliot blinked, surprised by the question. I think everyone deserves one, he said carefully. Why do you ask? Lily fidgeted with her cookie, her gaze focused on the crumbs in front of her. Because Mama works so hard, and I just want her to smile more. Like she used to, in the pictures. Elliot's chest tightened. He thought of Camille's weary eyes and the way she carried herself, as though the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. She used to laugh a lot when Daddy was here, Lily continued. But now, she only laughs a little, and only when she thinks I'm not looking. Elliot reached across the table, placing a hand gently over hers. You're a very thoughtful little girl, Lily, and I think your mom is lucky to have you looking out for her. Lily looked up, her eyes shining with determination. If you're Santa, can you make her happy? Again? For a moment, Elliot couldn't speak. He felt the full weight of Lily's innocent hope pressing down on him. I'll do my best, he said finally. I promise. Later that evening, as Camille tucked Lily into bed, she found herself lingering in the doorway, watching her daughter clutch the wooden charm Elliot had given her earlier, a tiny star she'd immediately claimed as her lucky charm. Did you have fun today? Camille asked softly. Lily nodded sleepily. Santa's funny. And nice. He makes good cookies too. Camille smiled faintly. I'm glad you had fun. Mama, Lily murmured, her voice heavy with drowsiness. I think Santa wants to make you happy too. Camille's heart clenched. She leaned down to kiss Lily's forehead. Good night, sweetheart. Back in his apartment, Elliot sat at his kitchen table, replaying the day's events in his mind. Lily's words echoed in his ears. Can you make her happy again? He stared at the photo of Camille and Lily, which now had a permanent spot on his table. The lines around Camille's eyes in the picture were softer, her smile radiant and unguarded. I'll try, Lily, he whispered. I'll try to make things right. But he knew that earning Camille's trust would be a marathon, not a sprint. Today was a step, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. Elliot leaned back in his chair, a quiet determination settling over him. For Lily's sake, and for the woman he had never stopped loving, he would find a way to repair the broken pieces of their lives. Elliot Carter stood nervously in front of the cafe's large bay window, his breath fogging in the chilly December air. Inside, the cafe glowed with warm light, its wooden tables crowded with people enjoying steaming mugs of coffee and pastries. The comforting hum of conversation reached him faintly through the glass, but it did little to calm his nerves. Today was the day. He had been surprised when Camille texted him. The message was short and to the point. Meet me at West Haven Cafe, Saturday at 2 p.m. Let's talk. No greeting. No farewell. Just a time, place, and a quiet command. Elliot straightened his jacket, inhaling deeply before pushing open the cafe door. The warmth enveloped him instantly, a stark contrast to the biting wind outside. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on Camille, sitting at a corner table near the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up as he approached, her expression carefully neutral. Hi, Elliot said softly, standing awkwardly by the table. Camille gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. He obeyed, feeling a knot of tension tighten in his chest. Her eyes, sharp and guarded, bore into him. This wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't sure you'd actually come, Camille began, breaking the silence. Elliot folded his hands on the table, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers. I almost didn't, but I knew I had to. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I want answers, Elliot. No excuses, no half-truths. Just the truth. Elliot nodded, his throat tightening. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, then began. I left because I was scared. Scared of failing you. Scared of becoming someone who would hold you back. Camille's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the mug. And you thought leaving us, was better than staying and trying to figure it out together? I convinced myself it was, Elliot admitted, his voice thick with regret. I told myself you deserved someone better. Someone who wasn't broken. Broken? Camille's tone was sharp, incredulous. Elliot, I wasn't looking for perfect. I was looking for you. The man I loved. The man who promised me a future and then disappeared without even giving me the chance to fight for us. Her words hit him like a blow. He dropped his head into his hands, breathing deeply to steady himself. I was a coward, Camille. I know that now. I didn't even realize how much I'd hurt you until it was too late. And by then, he paused, his voice faltering. By then, I thought you'd be better off without me. Camille leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Her composure cracked slightly, emotion flashing in her eyes. Do you have any idea what it was like? Waking up to find you gone. No explanation except a vague note saying you were sorry? Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering what I'd done wrong? Elliot opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand to stop him. And then, just when I started to piece my life back together, I met Ryan. He was kind and patient, and he helped me heal from the mess you left behind. Her voice softened at the mention of her late husband. He taught me that I could be loved again, even after everything. Elliot's heart ached at the raw vulnerability in her voice. He knew he had no right to feel jealous of Ryan, but he couldn't help the pang of regret that came with hearing how another man had stepped in to care for Camille when he hadn't. Ryan was a good man, Camille continued, her tone steadying. He was there for me when I needed someone most. But when he got sick, and when he died, she trailed off, her hands trembling slightly. I'm so sorry, Elliot whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have been there for both of you. Camille studied him for a long moment, her gaze unyielding. Why now, Elliot? Why come back after all these years? What do you want from us? I don't want anything, he said quickly. I just want to help, to make up for even a fraction of the pain I caused. Camille's jaw tightened. You can't erase the past. I know, he said, his voice firm, but I can try to build something better. For Lily. And for you, if you'll let me. Camille shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You think it's that simple? You think a few nice gestures and heartfelt apologies can fix everything? No, Elliot replied, his tone resolute. I don't. I know it's not simple, and I know I don't deserve your trust. Not yet. But I'm willing to. Do whatever it takes to earn it. Camille looked away, her expression conflicted. She sipped her coffee in silence for a moment, then set the mug down with a soft clink. I'll admit, she said finally, you've surprised me. The Elliot I knew back then would have run at the first sign of difficulty. But you've been showing up for Lily for me. And that's something. Elliot's heart lifted slightly at her words, though he remained cautious. Does that mean you'll give me a chance? For Lily's sake, Camille said, her tone guarded. She adores you, and I won't take that away from her. But I need to be clear about something, Elliot. He nodded. Anything. This isn't about us, she said, her eyes locking onto his. At least not yet. Lily comes first. If you hurt her, if you give her any reason to doubt you, I'll shut this down in a heartbeat. Elliot nodded again, his voice steady. I understand, and I promise I'll never hurt her. Or you. Not again. The tension between them softened slightly, though the air still felt heavy with unspoken words. Camille glanced out the window, watching a light snow begin to fall. I'm not saying I forgive you, she said quietly. But I can see you're trying. That counts for something. Elliot's chest swelled with hope. Thank you, he said sincerely. Camille stood, pulling on her coat. I have to get back to Lily. She's with Naomi, but she'll be expecting me soon. Elliot stood as well, his nerves returning. Camille, thank you for meeting with me. It means more than you know. She gave him a small nod, her expression unreadable. Don't make me regret it. As she walked out of the cafe, Elliot watched her go, a mixture of relief and determination settling over him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative step towards something new. And for the first time in years, Elliot felt like he was on the right path. The soft glow of the afternoon sun reflected off the snow-covered park, creating a dazzling winter wonderland. Elliot Carter adjusted his scarf as he waited near the ice skating rink, scanning the path for Camille and Lily. He had invited them to the community's winter festival, a day filled with festive activities he hoped would bring them all closer. When he spotted Lily's bright red coat bouncing in the distance, he couldn't help but smile. She skipped ahead of her mother, waving enthusiastically as she neared. Camille followed at a slower pace, bundled in a navy coat, her expression unreadable but calm. Santa, Lily called out, rushing up to him. We're here. Elliot crouched to her level, grinning. I'm glad you made it. Are you ready for some fun today? Lily nodded eagerly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Can we skate first? Please. Camille caught up, her breath visible in the cold air. She hasn't stopped talking about ice skating since last night, she said, her tone holding a faint trace of amusement. Elliot straightened and nodded toward the rink. Then we'd better get started. Lily practically dragged them to the rental booth, where Elliot helped her lace up her tiny skates. Camille watched from the bench, her arms crossed, but her lips twitching into a small smile as Lily peppered Elliot with questions about skating. Have you ever fallen? Did it hurt? What if I fall? Elliot laughed. Everyone falls, Lily. But the trick is to get back up and try again. As they stepped onto the ice, Lily wobbled, clutching tightly to Elliot's hand. He guided her patiently, skating backwards so he could face her, offering words of encouragement with every shaky glide she made. You're doing great, he said, smiling as she giggled. Just keep your knees bent and take small steps. Nearby, Camille stood at the edge of the rink, her arms crossed as she watched. Come on, Mom, Lily called, her voice echoing across the ice. You have to try to. Camille hesitated, but the hopeful look on Lily's face made her relent. She laced up her skates and stepped cautiously onto the ice, her balance steady but unsure. Elliot skated toward her, holding out a hand. Need some help? She raised an eyebrow, but took his hand reluctantly. I haven't done this in years, she admitted. I'll make sure you don't fall, he said with a grin. They glided slowly, Lily circling around them as her confidence grew. For a moment, Camille forgot her guardedness, letting herself enjoy the laughter and joy radiating from her daughter. After skating, the trio wandered into the park's open field, where dozens of families were building snowmen. Lily's eyes lit up at the sight, and she immediately began piling snow into a small mound. Help me, Santa, she called, waving Elliot over. Elliot joined her, kneeling in the snow as they worked together to roll a large base for their snowman. Camille stood nearby, observing them with a mix of amusement and caution. You're going to need arms for that snowman, she said, holding up 2 sticks she'd found. Perfect, Lily exclaimed, grabbing them. And we need a carrot for the nose. Elliot reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carrot he'd brought along, grinning as he handed it to Lily. I came prepared. Camille shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Of course you did. As the snowman took shape, Lily clapped her mittens together in excitement. He needs a name. How about Frosty? Elliot suggested. Too boring, Lily replied, scrunching her nose. I'll call him Mr. Snowpants. Camille chuckled softly, the sound catching Elliot's attention. He glanced at her, noting the rare ease in her expression. For a moment, she looked less burdened, more like the Camille he had once known. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the trio made their way to the community center for the Christmas dinner. The building was alive with festive energy. Strings of lights hung from the ceiling, carolers sang near the entrance, and a scent of roasted turkey filled the air. Elliot had arranged for tickets weeks ago, wanting to give Lily a magical experience and provide Camille with a well-deserved break from cooking. They found a cozy table near the front, where Lily's excitement only grew. She bounced in her seat, pointing out the decorations and humming along to the carols. Midway through the meal, a group of volunteers invited children to decorate gingerbread houses at a nearby station. Lily's eyes widened with excitement, and Camille nodded her approval for her to join. Elliot watched as Lily darted off, then turned his attention to Camille. "She's incredible," he said softly. Camille's expression softened as she glanced toward her daughter. "She is," she agreed. "She's been my anchor through everything." "I can see that," Elliot said, his tone sincere. "And you've done an amazing job raising her." Camille looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing the edge of her fork. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But I've done what I had to." Elliot hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I want to help Camille in any way you'll let me. Not to take over, just to lighten the load." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Elliot? Why does it matter to you after all this time?" "Because I've changed," he said, his voice steady. "And because I see what I missed. You and Lily. You deserve better from me. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right now." Camille's gaze held his for a long moment before she looked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Actions speak louder than words," she said simply. "I know," Elliot replied, "and I'm ready to prove it." When Lily returned, carrying a gingerbread house that leaned precariously to one side, her laughter filled the room. "Look, Mom, it's my candy castle." Camille smiled, taking the creation from her hands carefully. "It's perfect, sweetheart." As they left the community center later that evening, Lily skipped ahead, humming a Christmas tune. Camille and Elliot walked side by side, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. "You made her very happy today," Camille said finally, her voice soft. Elliot glanced at her, his heart lifting at her words. "That's all I wanted." Camille didn't respond, but as they reached her apartment, she paused before opening the door. "Good night, Elliot," she said, her tone not unfriendly. "Good night, Camille," he replied, his voice filled with quiet hope. As the door closed behind her, Elliot stood for a moment in the cold, a small smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't sure if he had made real progress with Camille, but he knew one thing for certain. They had started creating new memories, memories that might one day help heal the wounds of the past. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows of Camille Harris's apartment as she sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Across from her, Naomi Jacobs, her closest friend and confidant, stirred cream in her cup, glancing up occasionally to study Camille's face. "You're doing that thing again," Naomi said after a moment, her tone half teasing. Camille raised an eyebrow. "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend everything's fine when it's not," Naomi replied, leaning forward. "Comment spilit?" "What's going on with Elliot?" Camille sighed, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "Lily adores him. And I can see he's trying, Naomi. I really can." "But," she trailed off, her brow furrowing as she searched for the right words. "But you don't trust him," Naomi finished for her, her voice gentle. Camille nodded. "How can I? He walked out on me once without so much as a warning. Who's to say he won't do it again?" Naomi tilted her head thoughtfully. "From what you've told me, he seems different now. More grounded. More present." "That's what scares me," Camille admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I let him in and he leaves again? What if Lily gets hurt?" Naomi reached across the table, placing a comforting hand over Camille's. "You've been strong for so long, Cam. It's okay to let someone help carry the weight." Camille's eyes flicked to the window, where snowflakes drifted lazily against a pale sky. "I don't know if I can," she said softly. Meanwhile, Elliot Carter stood in the middle of a hardware store, his arms full of tools and supplies. He had spent the morning fixing the broken railing on Camille's apartment steps, a task he'd noticed needed attention during one of his visits. He paid for the materials and returned to the building, working quietly as neighbors passed by, some offering curious glances. The cold wind bit at his hands, But he didn't stop until the railing was secure and sturdy again. Elliot stepped back to admire his work, a faint smile of satisfaction tugging at his lips. He didn't want Camille to think he was trying to buy his way back into her life, but actions, real, tangible efforts, felt like the only way to show her he was serious about staying. Later that day, he dropped off groceries at the community center, ensuring they included Lily's favorite snacks, which she'd mentioned during one of their conversations. He wrote no note, left no signature. He wanted the gesture to speak for itself. That evening, Camille returned home after her shift at the hospital. She paused at the front steps, noticing the newly repaired railing. She ran her fingers along the smooth wood, her chest tightening. Inside, she found Lily sitting at the table, excitedly munching on her favorite cheese crackers. "Where did you get those?" Camille asked, setting her bag down. "Santa got them for me," Lily exclaimed, grinning. Camille's stomach churned. She knew it was Elliot's doing. The repaired railing, the groceries, the constant thoughtful gestures, they were undeniably his. "Mom, is Santa going to stay forever?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice tinged with hope. Camille froze, her heart aching at the innocent question. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because he makes you smile sometimes," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Even when you don't want to." Camille knelt beside her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lily, people don't stay just because we want them to. Sometimes they leave, even when we don't understand why." Lily tilted her head, her expression serious. "But Santa came back. That means he wants to stay, right?" Camille didn't answer. Instead, she hugged Lily tightly, wishing she could shield her daughter from the uncertainties of the world. The next weekend, Camille found herself at the community center for the annual winter donation drive. She was sorting clothes and toys alongside other volunteers when Elliot appeared, carrying a large box of blankets. "Need some help?" he asked, setting the box down with ease. Camille glanced at him, her expression guarded. "You don't have to be everywhere, you know." Elliot offered a small smile. "I'm not trying to crowd you, Camille. I just thought I could be useful." She didn't reply, but she didn't tell him to leave either. They worked side by side in silence, the occasional chatter of other volunteers filling the space. As they sorted donations, Elliot spoke hesitantly. "I know I've hurt you, and I know it's going to take time to earn your trust again, but I'm not going anywhere this time." Camille paused, her hands stilling over a pile of jackets. "Why now, Elliot? Why do you care so much?" He met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because I finally understand what I lost, and because I see how incredible you and Lily are. I don't want to run anymore, Camille. I want to be part of your lives." Her eyes softened, but the wall she had built around her heart remained firmly in place. "Actions speak louder than words, Elliot, and you have a lot to prove." "I know," he said simply. The following day, Camille and Lily attended a community holiday movie night at the local theater. To Camille's surprise, Elliot was there, seated a few rows behind them. When Lily spotted him, she ran over, tugging him toward their seats. "Come sit with us," she insisted, leaving him little choice but to oblige. Throughout the movie, Elliot stayed quiet, but Camille couldn't help noticing the way he interacted with Lily. How he laughed at her commentary, handed her popcorn without being asked, and leaned down to listen intently whenever she whispered something to him. By the time the movie ended, Lily was half asleep, leaning against Elliot's shoulder as they walked to the car. Camille hesitated, then finally spoke. "Thank you," she said softly. Elliot looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For being good to her," Camille replied, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "She deserves that." Elliot smiled gently. "So do you." Camille's chest tightened at his words, but she said nothing. That night, Camille sat alone in her living room, the soft glow of the Christmas tree casting shadows across the walls. She stared at the repaired railing visible through the window, the groceries on the counter, and the sleeping figure of Lily clutching her wooden charm. For so long, Camille had carried the weight of her pain alone, convinced that letting anyone in would only lead to more heartache. But as she thought about Elliot's quiet determination, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. The soft glow of the Christmas tree lit up Camille Harris's living room as snow fell gently outside, blanketing the streets in a hushed white. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously arranging ornaments on the lower branches, her face a picture of concentration. Camille sat nearby on the couch, nursing a mug of tea and watching her daughter with a small smile. The evening was peaceful, yet Camille's thoughts churned. Since Elliot's return, her emotions had been a turbulent mix of hope, fear, and longing. Each quiet gesture he made chipped away at the walls she'd built around her heart, and now she was left wondering if it was time to let him in, or if doing so would only lead to more heartbreak. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Camille's heart skipped as she glanced at the clock. It was late, too late for anyone but him. "Mama, is it Santa?" Lily asked, her eyes lighting up as she hurried to the door. "No, sweetie, it's probably just," but before she could finish, Lily had opened the door. There stood Elliot Carter, holding a small, neatly wrapped gift. His breath fogged in the cold night air, and a nervous smile played on his lips. "Evening," he said, his voice soft. "Santa!" Lily exclaimed, grabbing his hand and pulling him inside without hesitation. Camille stood, setting her mug down and crossing her arms. "Elliot, it's late. What are you doing here?" "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quickly. I wanted to drop this off for Lily." He handed the gift to Lily, who immediately plopped down on the floor to open it. Inside was a beautifully illustrated storybook, its cover depicting a winter wonderland that matched the scene outside. "It's so pretty," Lily said, her eyes wide. "Can we read it tonight, Mama?" Camille's resolve softened at the sight of her daughter's joy, but her guarded expression remained as she turned back to Elliot. "Thank you, but you didn't have to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I wanted to." After Lily excused herself to add the book to her growing collection, Camille motioned for Elliot to sit. The room felt smaller with him in it, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them both. "We need to talk," Camille said, her tone firm. Elliot nodded. "I figured as much." Camille took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of her mug. "I've spent a long time being angry with you, Elliot. Not just because you left, but because you didn't give me a choice. You decided for both of us that we weren't worth fighting for." "I know," he said, his voice thick with regret. "And I'll never stop regretting that decision." Camille held up a hand. "Let me finish." He fell silent, his eyes fixed on her. "For years I carried that pain alone. I told myself I didn't need you, that I was better off without you. And in some ways I was, but I also closed myself off. I didn't trust anyone to stay because you taught me how easily people can leave." Elliot's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to say something, to apologize again, but he knew this was her moment to speak. "But then you came back," Camille continued, her voice wavering slightly. "And you've been showing up, not just for Lily but for me too. You've repaired more than just a railing, Elliot. You've started to repair the part of me that stopped believing people could change." Her words hung in the air, the silence heavy with emotion. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I'm not saying I forgive you completely, but I'm willing to try. Not just for Lily, but for me. Because I'm tired of carrying this alone." Elliot leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Camille, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do everything I can to earn it. I promise you, I'm here for the long haul. No more running. No more excuses." As if on cue, Lily reappeared, holding the storybook tightly. "Can we read it now? All of us together?" Camille hesitated, glancing at Elliot. He gave her a small nod, and she smiled faintly. "Sure, sweetheart. Let's read it together." They settled on the couch, Lily nestled between them with the book open on her lap. Elliot's voice filled the room as he read the story, his tone warm and animated, bringing the characters to life. Camille watched him out of the corner of her eye, her heart softening with each page. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain and loss. A future that included Elliot. As the story ended, Lily yawned and leaned her head against Elliot's arm. "Santa, do you think we'll all have a happy Christmas this year?" Elliot smiled down at her, his voice steady. "I think we will, Lily. As long as we're together, I think we'll be just fine." Camille's chest tightened, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She reached out and gently placed a hand on Lily's back, meeting Elliot's gaze with a tentative but genuine smile. After Lily had fallen asleep, Camille walked Elliot to the door. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world quiet and still. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly, her voice sincere. "Thank you for letting me be here," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. "Good night, Elliot," Camille said finally, her tone holding a hint of warmth. "Good night, Camille," he replied, stepping out into the cold with a heart lighter than it had been in years. As she closed the door, Camille leaned against it, a small but genuine smile spreading across her face. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. The streets of West Haven glowed with festive lights as Christmas Eve settled over the town like a soft, warm blanket. Snowflakes danced in the crisp air, creating a picture-perfect winter scene. Elliot Carter stood at the edge of the town square, scanning the setup he had orchestrated over the past few weeks. Every detail had been carefully planned, every string of lights placed with purpose. Tonight had to be perfect, not extravagant, but meaningful, something Camille and Lily would never forget. The square buzzed with quiet activity as volunteers adjusted garlands and lit candles in preparation for the evening. A group of carolers in Victorian-style costumes rehearsed in a corner, their harmonies floating through the air like a promise of magic to come. Nearby, a sleigh with shining silver runners and crimson seats stood ready, its harnessed horses snorting softly in the cold. Elliot took a deep breath. This wasn't just about making an impression. It was about showing Camille and Lily how deeply he cared, not with words, but with actions that spoke louder. At 7 p.m. sharp, Camille and Lily arrived in the square. Camille wore a dark green coat and matching gloves, her breath forming small clouds as she took in the scene. Lily skipped ahead, her red scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon. "Mom, look at all the lights!" Lily exclaimed, her face aglow with wonder. Camille couldn't hide her surprise as her eyes swept over the twinkling display. She spotted Elliot near the sleigh, his face lighting up as he saw them. "Elliot," she said, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and warmth. "Did you?" "Guilty," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "I wanted to do something special for both of you." Lily bounded over to him, grabbing his hand. "Santa, is the sleigh for us? Can we ride in it?" "It sure is," Elliot said, kneeling to her level. "But first, there's something else." He nodded to the carolers, who stepped forward and began singing Silent Night. Their voices filled the square, the gentle melody weaving through the crisp air. Families gathered around, joining in with soft murmurs, their faces lit by the warm glow of candlelight. Camille stood silently, her hands in her pockets, watching the scene unfold. She glanced at Elliot, her gaze softening as she took in the effort he'd put into creating this moment. After the caroling, Elliot helped Lily and Camille into the sleigh, tucking a heavy wool blanket over their laps. He climbed in beside them, taking the reins as the horses began a gentle trot through the snowy streets. Lily's laughter rang out as she pointed to the decorated houses they passed, each one glowing with twinkling lights and festive displays. "Look, Mama, that one has a giant snowman." Camille laughed softly, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elliot stole a glance at her, his heart swelling. This was the Camille he remembered, open, warm, and full of quiet joy. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that the wall she had built might finally be coming down. As they passed the park, Elliot brought the sleigh to a stop. "I thought we could take a little break here," he said, gesturing to a clearing where a small fire crackled, surrounded by lantern-lit benches. Elliot led them to the fire, where a thermos of hot cocoa and a small tin of cookies waited. Lily dug into the treats immediately, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Camille sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Camille," Elliot began, his voice low, "I know I've said this before, but I need you to know how much this means to me. Being here with you and Lily, it's all I've ever wanted." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Elliot, You've done so much for us these past weeks. But I still worry. What happens if you change your mind again? I won't, he said firmly, his gaze steady. I've learned from my mistakes. Leaving you was the worst decision of my life, and I'll spend the rest of it making sure you never doubt me again. For a long moment, Camille said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. I'm still scared, she admitted, but I'm willing to try. For Lily. And for us. Elliot's breath caught as their hands intertwined. He squeezed her fingers gently, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and gratitude. As the fire crackled softly, Lily ran up to them, holding a snowball in her mittened hands. Look what I made, she exclaimed, beaming. Elliot and Camille laughed, the tension between them melting away as they admired Lily's handiwork. In that moment, they weren't just two adults grappling with the past. They were a family, bound together by love, hope, and the shared promise of brighter days ahead. The story of Elliot, Camille, and Lily is more than just a tale of second chances. It's a testament to the power of persistence, the courage to face one's mistakes, and the importance of forgiveness, not just for others, but for oneself. Camille's journey shows that healing takes time and trust, but it's possible when you're open to the possibility of love. And Elliot's transformation reminds us that it's never too late to change, to right the wrongs of the past, and to build a better future. For Lily, the light of innocence and unconditional love shines brightest. She represents the hope and joy that can bridge even the deepest divides. As the sleigh carried them back toward the square, the bells on the horses' harnesses jingled softly in the night air. Elliot and Camille exchanged a glance, their hands still clasped beneath the blanket. This Christmas was more than a holiday. It was a beginning, a promise to move forward together one step at a time. Under the sparkling lights of West Haven, they weren't just a trio of people finding their way. They were a family. And for the first time in years, the future felt bright. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with us until the very end of this heartfelt story. Wishing you and your loved ones a Merry Christmas filled with joy, love, and cherished moments. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more inspiring tales coming your way. See you in the next story.